I have to speak on Naziah Harris and the community who failed her. And I am only presented with certain evidence. The one thing I had highlighted in pink was the quote, "In this case, there was no physical evidence such as bloodstains or a weapon leaking defendant to Joyce's death." In this case, we don't have the same facts or circumstances. I do agree this is a circumstantial case, and circumstantial evidence is sufficient for a bind over and even conviction. Today is January 9th, 2025, exactly 1 year, from the day Naziah Harris disappeared. Before I get into the charges, and the main charge of premeditated first-degree murder, I have to speak on Naziah Harris and the community who failed her. And I am only presented with certain evidence. I don't know the whole story. The attorneys know more than me, the family knows more than me, but from what I have heard over the last 4 days and 5 days total, is that several people failed her. I don't know where her mother is. I don't know anything other than that she was forced to live in a home where she was not protected or given the adequate attention and love. I don't know where her father is. I don't have any mention of him in her life, no presence. To Cordell, AKA King, and all the men who saw Jarvis Butts hanging out and always around these young girls, including Naziah, and his 9-year-old daughter going up to the shop to clean up his shop. The school counselor who never showed up, or the person who was supposed to show up if that counselor was absent, after Naziah was on the floor on the day she went missing, saying that she needed to speak to someone and speak to a counselor. There's no mention of CPS, but I wonder what their involvement was over the years, because this was not just a 1-year thing. There are text messages at least from 2022. To her adoptive grandmother, Annette Harris, whose testimony, in my opinion, was very questionable. I understand why the people put her on the stand to establish Naziah's residence and the houses on Bedford and the regular routine, to establish also that Naziah was not a runaway child, that she was not a bad kid. I do believe she adopted Naziah. I do believe that she had 6 kids in the house. I believe that Naziah had on a dark hoodie the day she went missing, and that she had on red and black Nikes that day. What is hard to believe is that the defendant never came into the house as she testified. And there was also a minor that testified that he did as well. Text messages that show between him and Naziah that he did in the basement, saying he was going to the shower, stealing her panties. He was always lurking around that house and asking for Janiyah and Zaniyah, from what I know. I even thought about the breakfast routine and saying that all the kids like eating breakfast at school. Did they have a choice? I don't know. But to always send those girls up there to clean up the shop raises questions. And how were there 2 women in that house who have birthed children themselves who did not notice that Naziah was pregnant, and I believe she was, and not having her period anymore? But then after hearing text messages today, begging Jarvis for pads as if she didn't have anyone else to get them for her. And what stood out the most was when Annette Harris stood on the stand, and she learned around 6 p.m. that Naziah did not come home from school, and said she looked around for her and decided to wait until the next morning to call the police. Without a tear, without emotion, or any expression of being devastated. And to her Aunt Shannon, who also showed no emotion, expression of being devastated from Naziah going missing. She stated that she had friends help look for Naziah, but was directed to just wait until the morning to call the police. A grown woman who likely suspected something strange going on didn't feel the need to call the police either. They were both able to go to sleep at night without hearing from Naziah or having any indication that she was coming home at night. And of course, the defendant, who I will get to in a minute. I don't know who else failed Naziah, but the community did. As far as the people establishing probable cause, I will focus on count 1 as it's been stated that there is no contention with counts 2 and 3. In count 3, I will amend based off of the motion and the testimony I heard that Neziah was 12 and not 13 at the time that Jarvis Butts had sexual intercourse with her. The prosecution is correct. You do not have to have a body to establish first-degree premeditated murder. It would have been a much shorter exam had her body been found, but this is where we are. In the last 365 days, no text messages. We all heard today and yesterday that she was very active and frequently texted. No social media for a year. We heard through testimony that she was also active on social media. No phone calls, which she was also able to do according to testimony. No physical sighting of her by anyone. She never came back to school. No one has seen her. Medical records dated from July 2014 to October 2023 indicated that she had no life-threatening medical issues that would lead to a natural cause of death. The black hoodie found in the area of 7 Mile and Berg with her DNA and blood on it. The holes in the hoodie consistent with some sort of struggle, violence, or weapon being used. And we know that there were no holes in that hoodie when she wore it to school. We saw a picture of her in a black hoodie on her last day that everyone saw her. I do believe her grandma testified truthfully about the sweatshirt that she had on and that it was practically new. And the border agent who said that no evidence of animals would have destroyed the clothing or the shoes to possibly lead to animals tearing up that hoodie. The clear glasses found in the blue Nissan the day after she went missing. The behavior of the defendant when he snatched those glasses. They looked exactly like the glasses she had on in her last picture, according to the witness. The shoes that her brother described as the same shoes that were found also in the area of 7 Mile and Berg, near the hoodie. While this is still probable cause, the evidence all points to Jarvis Butts. His locations, him being seen with her last, the abortion searches, the abrupt silence between the two of them in text messages, and the constant lies he told throughout the entire investigation. And they were proven to be lies with text messages and other testimony. We may never know what happened, but from what I heard today and over the last 4 or 5 days, it appears he intended to perform what he thought was a do-it-yourself abortion on Neziah and went south, and instead of seeking medical attention for her, he intentionally killed her and tried his best to cover it up. As much as I want her to be alive today, there is at least probable cause to show and believe that she is dead and that she was murdered by Jarvis Butts. Mr. Butts, stand up. You've been sitting over there for 4 days with your head down, hidden between and behind your attorneys with your mask on and taking vigorous notes. I want you to pay attention and listen to everything I have to say. I have been trying to figure out for the last 5 days, you. At one point, I thought you were cognitively impaired in the beginning of this exam. And then maybe you had the brain of a 10-year-old, and that's why you were doing such things. But as I heard more and more testimony, you're just the true definition of a pedophile. Watching you laugh and brag about all the women you have with different women and the children and the girlfriends, and making babies to groom them and having them in your presence and cleaning up, quote, cleaning up your shop, and the little girls around you has landed you here today. You groomed Neziah. You played mind games with her. We all heard that. You controlled her emotionally. She was exposed to so much at such a young age. The text messages between you two were disgusting to hear. And to think that she had you saved in her phone as bae for life. Neziah deserves so much more. And while I mentioned other people that failed her, Jarvis Butts, you are the monster in this whole picture. She did deserve love from her parents and everyone who was in her life. She was ignored. She was neglected, and you took complete advantage of that. She wanted someone to love her, and she will never know what that feels like. Your children deserve more. As much as defense counsel has raised issues on count 1, all that has done is raise the question of fact for the trier of fact, which means that this will be for a jury or a judge to hear at Third Circuit. I pray for the healing of all the victims and the young girls and possibly boys who have come into contact with you. As a community, we should look at this case as a prime example of how much work we have to do when it comes to protecting our children and especially our Black girls. I pray for closure and healing for all those who have been traumatized by you. And for you, Jarvis Butts, I wish you a speedy trial and that justice be delivered. Your bind over date is January 16th at 9 o'clock a.m. Anything else for the record?
Do the right thing and tell us where she's at, please. I'm sorry, Judge. Just do it, Jarvis.
Where is she at, Jarvis?
Just tell us.
You don't got no remorse, no nothing, bro.
Judge, I'm sorry. I'm not trying to disrespect your court.
If you all could turn off the camera, I don't know the whole story. The attorneys know more than me, the family knows more than me. But from what I have heard over the last 4 days and 5 days total, is that several people failed her. And how were there 2 women in that house who have birthed children themselves who did not notice that Neziah was pregnant, and I believe she was, and not having her period anymore? But then after hearing text messages today, begging Jarvis for pads as if she didn't have anyone else to get them for her. And what stood out the most was when Annette Harris stood on the stand and she learned around 6 p.m. that Neziah did not come home from school, and said she looked around for her and decided to wait until the next morning to call the police. Without a tear, without emotion, or any expression of being devastated.
The minor witness testified that it happened at the old shop, and when Ms. Ripley was asking questions, she identified that as being the location. Cordell Wright testified back in November that they didn't move from that shop, which was at East Warren and Neff in the city of Detroit, until May or June, based on Neziah's birthday, which is in her medical records. At that time, she would have been 12 years old, and the minor witness testified clearly describing an act of penetration, specifically penis to anal opening. With respect to the criminal child sexually abusive activity, that would be based on the text messages as well as the minor's testimony as well. Combining those 2 things satisfies the elements of those charges. However, going to count 1 in murder in the first degree premeditated, I would like to go through and put some of the pieces together. And we are standing here today in court on January 9th, 2025, which is 1 year, almost to the minute, the last time Neziah was seen on a camera in the city of Detroit, which is on the screen now. The last time that she was seen was on January 9th, 2024 at 2:56, getting off of the bus at 3 Mile Drive in Cornwall and walking down Bedford. She was walking towards what she didn't know at the time would be Jarvis Butts and her ultimate murder by him. We take that moment in time and then go to Cordell Wright's testimony where he testified that they picked Neziah up on their way back to their shop at 9000 Connor, and they proceeded with her to that location. We have Jarvis Butts' sister's testimony, Tijuana Butts, who did say that she saw a young girl with a very descriptive and distinct jacket getting in and out of that car, the white Cadillac Escalade. That would have been before Jarvis, Cordell, and Neziah departed for Ypsilanti. We have Sergeant O'Rourke's testimony as to his cell phone locations based on cell tower information and the historical call detail records, which placed them consistent going out to Ypsilanti. And then we have Cordell's testimony getting them back to the shop. Talasha Moore also testified to seeing Neziah in Ypsilanti with Cordell and Jarvis. Cordell, as we know, testified that he had to get back to his house based on his tether hours by 9 p.m. And that is the last time that anyone who is not Jarvis Butts would see Neziah Harris alive. From the shop, we proceed out to the Park Crest Inn, where Jarvis Butts checked into a hotel at 9:30 p.m. And Sergeant O'Rourke's testimony corroborates this, placing his phone in the area of that 20,000 Harper address at around midnight till early in the next morning on the 10th, using the data that you see on the screen in those times. Recapping January 9th, this is the last time that we have any sort of communication from Neziah. There was, if you look at those messages that Sergeant Jones went through and read, just between Neziah and Jarvis, there was consistent and constant communication up until January 9th. There's also no messages from Jarvis after Neziah goes missing on the 9th, looking for her, seeing where she is, trying to find her, trying to help, as anyone should do at that time, her family locate her. There's no messages to her phone, to that Text Now account from Jarvis Butts' phone. Her legal guardian and grandmother, Annette Harris, has not seen any social media posts. The OIC of the case, Sergeant Jones, has not seen anything for a total of 1 year now. The Lieutenant George Harris, who was involved in the investigation in the first month, didn't see anything that he saw from social media or Text Now after the 9th. Jarvis Butts on the 9th, we know, borrowed Latricia Johnson's car overnight, which was unusual. He borrowed that and then again borrowed it on the 10th or 11th. We know that Neziah's glasses were found in that car sometime after the 10th or 11th when Latricia Johnson was at that shop, and Jarvis Butts snatches them out of her hand. From the Park Crest Inn and from January 9th, we go out to 7 Mile and Burke. This is by far the most important location in this case, because we know that the defendant spent from 11:40 p.m. on the 10th to 1:34 a.m., nearly 2 hours in that area, in that wooded area where the Rouge River runs through. And to give, this is from the slideshow of the scene photos that were taken at 7 Mile and Burke. This is the area where it's the people's theory Jarvis Butts did at least one of two things: either killed Neziah at 7 Mile and Burke, but at the very least dumped her body in this location. We know this because of the evidence that was found there, specifically the black hoodie, which you see in this photo here, as well as the pink bodysuit and the shoes that we confirmed, or that are hers, based on the picture that the OIC received from her brother. And those items were collected. The black hoodie and pink jumpsuit were tested. And importantly, Rion Green testified as to which swabs were which. This analysis here and hypothesis and results pertains to the right shoulder swab on Neziah Harris's black hoodie that she took that picture in when she was in school on January 9th. The one, importantly, that Annette Harris testified was in good condition when Neziah left. We will get to pictures of that, but this shows that Neziah Harris's DNA is there, as well as Jarvis. And importantly, this is one of the stain swabs that was positive, not just for blood, but human blood, based on the hemotrace results. In the next one, we have, this pertains to not the stain swabs, but the regular swab that Rion Green testified was a wearer ID swab. Importantly here, Jarvis Butts' DNA from that swab that would have been taken around the neck of that sweater, or the end of the arms of that sweater, is there with very strong support, and of course Neziah's DNA is there as well. And when we look at that sweater, specifically through the PowerPoint photos that Rion Green took and put together, we can see that there is a lot of markings on this. If the court looks closely on this, and I did, there are 15 phenol-positive stain markings on this sweater. This is just the front of that sweater. And of course, the court paid attention and saw the markings or the damage to the hood, that it is the people's theory would have been stab wounds or something to that effect that happened when Jarvis Butts murdered Neziah Harris. We also have to look, and it goes to the premeditation element as well as everything he did before, at Jarvis Butts' actions, specifically what he did to attempt to conceal or cover up his role in the murder of Isaiah Harris. First, we have the glasses that he made sure he grabbed directly from Latricia Johnson's hands when shown, that are consistent with the glasses she had in the photo from the night when she was in school. We have the jail call to Cordell Wright to get that phone of his out of Miss Davis's car and into someone else's possession, which he testified he tried to do, but was ultimately unsuccessful. And then Sergeant Jones testified that they ultimately did recover that phone from Miss Davis's car. There is the phone call to Latricia Johnson, which was played when she was testifying, saying to get anything he touched clean, to clean anything he touched, to get anything, don't drive her car, drive his mom's car, which is important because when you combine her testimony of when Jarvis Butts took her car, those 2 times on the 9th and 10th, and then either the next day or that same day, it's important because that car is the car that he transported Isaiah Harris out to 7 Mile and Bird to either dump her body or to murder and then dump her body there. And we can go through all of the lies that Jarvis Butts told any detective or any officer that he testified to, but in highlighting those, he denies to Detective Mays that he was with Neziah at all or had talked to Neziah at all on the 9th, denies ever picking her up, denies to, even when confronted with the January 9th messages, he said that it wasn't him initially. Obviously, we heard in the subsequent interviews, specifically on June 1st with the OIC, he came off of that. He told Shannon Harris that Neziah texted him on the 9th. She says that he never did that. And we have some of their messages in the record as well. He denies going to a hotel and denies going to a hotel with Neziah Harris and denies having any sort of sexual relationship with Neziah, even though the text now messages completely prove that that is an absolute lie. We also have his motive. We know from Sergeant Jones that he was going to be going into custody supposedly on January 9th for until roughly December, I believe, is what Sergeant Jones testified to. We know that that date was adjourned because he said in his interview that he had a legal issue. He said it was out in Clinton Township, but I submit to this court that that's not the legal issue he was talking about. He was talking about the legal issue he would have had if Neziah had been left alive. He had to make sure that when he was in custody that she was not going to give birth to any child of his. That's his motive in this case. That's why that's January 9th. Sentencing date was adjourned to February 7th so he could take care of that potential legal issue. He was being told consistently by Neziah throughout the months that she might be pregnant, and then on 11/27, she says to him that it's hard to do this gym shit with this baby. Less than a week or 2 weeks later, he's searching on Google how to abort a baby, how to not just abort a baby or get an abortion, but how to do it at home, how to get rid of that without any medical professional or any responsible mandated reporter knowing about it. We clearly have that motive. And obviously, Judge, one of the big issues in this case is proving that Neziah Harris is dead without having a body. On January 9th, she vanished off the face of the earth. There is absolutely no evidence after the 9th that she was alive, that she was sending messages to anyone. Her, again, legal guardian had not seen her since the 9th. No one else, officers, friends, family have seen her since the 9th. There's no social media posts reviewed by any officer to this day that would indicate she was alive. There's no messages, no further messages on text now after the 9th. There's a full and complete stop of any activity that would indicate she was alive. And Judge, I submit to this court that if that were the evidence that we had at this point, that would be enough at this point for a probable cause determination to show that she is in fact deceased today. However, there is more than that. Her hoodie found at 7 Mile and Bird, which we just saw a photo of, has Jarvis Butts' DNA on it and Neziah Harris's DNA on it, and it is covered in blood. indicating that something traumatic happened to her. And all the other evidence shows that something traumatic happened to her at the hands of Jarvis Butts. And then we go back to his motive. Was told by Nizaya that she was pregnant, searched all of the home abortion procedures, and was going to go into the Wayne County Jail until December, which we just passed, of 2024. Judge, I submit to this court that the evidence that you have heard over the last 4 days proves not only that Nizaya Harris is currently deceased, but also that she was murdered by the defendant, who had plenty of motive to do so, had plenty of opportunity to do so, and he did that. And I will note that the defendant in this case, Jarvis Butts, does not get a break because he successfully hid her body. The evidence to a probable cause determination, which the question is she probably dead, and did the defendant probably do that? Both questions are answered with a yes, based on all of the evidence that you have seen. I would reserve any further argument for rebuttal. Thank you.
Attorney Quick?
Thank you, Judge. I know how well aware the court is that we have a very serious task here. We've been here for 4 days, and at this point, we have to look critically at what we've heard and what we've seen over the last 4 days and determine if there's enough evidence by a probable cause standard that Mr. Butts committed premeditated first-degree murder. And if you look critically at what the evidence is and the lack of connection between these pieces of alleged evidence, there is not even by probable cause standard. To bind over on premeditated first-degree murder, there has to be sufficient facts or evidence to show by a probable cause standard that each of the elements of premeditated murder in the first degree were committed. First, there's got to be a death. There has to be evidence that the defendant caused the death of the deceased, that some action that he made or did caused that person's death, that there was an intent to kill, that the intent to kill was premeditated, and that it was deliberate. And here there is not enough evidence, even by a probable cause standard, that Jarvis Butts caused the death of Nizaya Harris. There's been no testimony of any eyewitness stating that they saw Jarvis Butts doing any act that could have caused Nizaya Harris's death. There's been no testimony of any eyewitness that they saw Jarvis Butts doing anything in preparation of doing something that could have caused her death. And there's been no admission of Mr. Butts to support that element. There's not probable cause to believe that Mr. Butts had an intent to kill Nizaya Harris, nor that he premeditated her death. There's no evidence of any threats made by Mr. Butts to Nizaya. There's no evidence of any threats made to a third party that he was going to do something or that he had a problem that he had to take care of. The issue or the statement was he had a legal matter. And Ms. Davis testified that she was aware of an issue that he had in Clinton Township and that she was the one that was driving him around to court. There's no testimony that he took any specific action in a deliberation to kill her or that in killing her. There's Google searches about legal ways to abort a child, not how to kill somebody or dispose of a body. There's no evidence that he did anything related to the Google searches. There's no receipts of purchases or anything like that. And these text messages were 2 weeks after they were, I believe, December 9th and 10th, which was, I believe, 2 weeks or 13 days from 11/27/23, which is the text message about gym class. And then there's this kind of cryptic text message in between that says, "It healed." We don't know what that means, but we don't know what Mr. Butts took that to mean. It doesn't necessarily mean that he believed she was pregnant. There's no evidence of a pregnancy. We have medical records until, I believe it's October of 2023, that don't indicate a pregnancy, that she had been to the doctor in September when she originally texts or messages Mr. Butts and says she thinks that she's pregnant. There's no evidence of a pregnancy. She went to the doctor. We heard from both her guardian, her grandmother, and her aunt, Shannon Harris, who lived with her. No testimony from either of them that they suspected that she was pregnant, that there was any medical issues that they had to take care of because that would have caused them to think that she was pregnant. There was an insinuation, well, was she wearing baggy clothing? Was she wearing bigger clothing? There was no testimony that they had to go out and buy new clothes for her because her clothes didn't fit, or that she started wearing baggy clothing. She was wearing denim pants on the day that she disappeared, and there was no testimony that those were not pants that they had recently bought because she didn't fit into the clothing that she previously had. There's no evidence of any kind of plan. There's no messaging between Mr. Butts and Ms. Harris that indicates an escalation of animosity between the two of them. In fact, he essentially kind of starts to disengage. And so there's no written evidence that he had any kind of plan or any animosity toward her at that point. Our submission would be that he understood at that point that she wasn't pregnant and was disengaging. Let's talk about what we did see. So we know that Messiah got on her school bus around 2:45 on the 9th. She got off the bus a few minutes later, and then she was seen walking up Bedford. She was wearing at that point light colored blue jeans, a black hoodie, and then a colorful coat with fur around the hood. There's some insinuation that somehow there was a plan that she would meet up with Mr. Butts, but the testimony of Mr. Wright was that they were driving around that afternoon back and forth to various auto part stores, and I believe that they in fact had to go back to one kind of unplanned because they either missed something or there was an issue. And so to say that somehow Mr. Butts would have known that she would have been on that street at that specific time and that they would have been there at that specific time is quite a leap, considering they didn't know where they were going to be when, because they were doing all this driving around back and forth to various stores. Witnesses put Messiah at Mr. Butts' auto shop later that afternoon, and then in Ypsilanti with Mr. Butts and Cordell Wright, and Mr. Wright puts her back at the shop later that evening. But then we hear from Sergeant O'Rourke, who did all the cell phone mapping, that at 9 p.m., Mr. Butts was actually at 13662 Wilshire, which is his home, where Angel Leonard lives, and where they have kids. So did Messiah go back with him to that house? And then at 9:30 is when he checks into the Park Crest Motel. Now, we don't know who was with him there, but there is no evidence that Messiah was ever there. They searched it, they took DNA, they took clippings of various things, they swabbed a shower drain, and there's no evidence that she was ever in that room. We did hear testimony that the Park Crest is a known place where Mr. Butts frequents and takes various lady friends for a rendezvous. It's much more possible and plausible that he took one of his lady friends there, than somebody who he was going to kill, right? He's going to a place where they know him. He's a frequent flyer there. And is he going to take somebody there where he would later, before he was going to kill them? That makes no sense. That is not logical. We heard then that after Mr. Butts left the Park Crest Motel, he went to 4 Alexandria, which is Midtown, so kind of across town, and that's where his other girlfriend, Najeen Rushing, lives. So did he take Naziah with him there to see Miss Rushing? And he stays there for a while, I think, according to Sergeant O'Rourke's mapping. And then we hear that he is at 7 Mile and Berg on January the 10th at 11:40 p.m. for over an hour. That's almost 24 hours from when he initially, it's beyond 24 hours from when he initially is with Naziah, or when he's last with Naziah. And so it's illogical to think that he was driving around with Naziah, visiting all of his girlfriends, or if he had done something to her previously, that she was in the car with him while he did that. And in fact, they took a cadaver dog around the car and didn't find anything, and they tested the vehicles, all of his vehicles, every car that he drove, for DNA, for any sign that Naziah had been in there, and they found nothing. And the call to Ms. Johnson asking her to wipe down the Sentra that she used, that he had borrowed, is kind of irrelevant because she testified that she didn't do it. That she did nothing based on what he called to say, and they still didn't, nothing was found. We heard about a pink jumpsuit that was found. We didn't hear any testimony that anybody saw Neziah wearing this pink jumpsuit. She's not seen wearing it in any video. I don't believe that anybody even identified it as being hers. I don't believe there was any testimony from either Annette Harris or Shannon Harris stating, yes, we recognize that pink jumpsuit, that's something that Neziah wears. When did she have it? There was one blood stain on that jumpsuit. And the testimony from the forensic analyst, Breon Green, was that it was such a small stain that she was afraid she would consume it if she did additional testing. She tested it once and couldn't do any follow-up testing or confirmatory testing because she was afraid they were going to consume the sample. There was also no statistically significant support for finding Mr. Butts' DNA on that stain sample from the pink jumpsuit. And there was no statistically significant probability that his DNA was on the jumpsuit at all, that he had had any contact with the jumpsuit. And they took a lot of swabs of that jumpsuit. I believe the number was that forensic analyst Anderson testified to, that it was 24 trillion times more likely to have originated from two unrelated unknown contributors than Jarvis Butts. And we heard about the black hoodie. And that black hoodie was significantly more weathered than the pink jumpsuit. We heard about that from the Border Patrol agent Barnes and other folks that came into contact with that sweatshirt, that it looked like it had been out in the weather much longer. And we don't have an explanation for that, but those appear to be tears in the top of the hood. They don't appear to be stab wounds, and they certainly don't appear to be bullet holes. There's weak support for conclusion that Mr. Butts was a contributor to the stain in the swabs of the black hoodie. The only real support for any DNA on the black hoodie was on the non-stained part. And there's testimony that Ms. Harris was wearing that hoodie on the 9th, that she was in Mr. Butts' Escalade when he and Mr. Wright picked her up after seeing her walking down Harper, that they were in the car driving up to Ypsilanti. And so the possibility that his DNA got on this non-stained part of the black hoodie is not evidence of premeditated murder in the context of all the ways that we heard somebody's DNA can get on a piece of clothing. And I kind of talked about this, but we heard testimony that Mr. Butts drove both a Cadillac Escalade and a Nissan Sentra on January 9th and January 10th. There's a lot of pieces of those cars that were tested. Trunk carpet from various areas in both cars, the driver's floor mat, the driver's seat, the door handle, trunk speakers, the trunk frame. All of those things were swabbed for blood and nothing was found. We heard about a school ID card that belonged to Neziah. We heard Valerie Smith testify that she noticed it at some point in February, maybe a month or so after Neziah was last seen, and that she decided to pick it up 2.5 weeks after she first spotted it. But she was pretty clear that she only noticed it about 2.5 or about 2 weeks before, but that she looked at it every single day. Seemingly, if it had been there before then, she would have noticed it. When did it get there? We don't know. There was no evidence, there's no testimony as to that. And there was no other evidence found in the 7 Mile and Greenfield area, and there's no evidence that Mr. Butts was there. We talked a little bit about the medical records, but all they tell us is that Neziah Harris didn't have a life-threatening condition as of October 24th. They don't tell us anything about her physical condition between the 24th and the 9th, and they don't tell us that she was pregnant. They're just not relevant, except for the fact, I guess, that they don't tell us that she was pregnant, and she was there on September the 27th, according to her text messages. What we haven't heard in the last 3 to 4 days is anything about a murder weapon. We've heard that they collected guns, But we don't know if any of them actually operated, and they tested them for DNA, and there was nothing found. When did those guns get taken from a house? When did they get put back, if any of them had been used? And I mean, we just simply don't have any evidence as to whether they were even touched by Mr. Butts. But certainly there was no DNA from Mr. Harris on them. And if one was to use a gun to bludgeon somebody enough where they break the skin and bleed, there's going to be DNA on that gun. If somebody is shot at close range by a gun, there's likely to be DNA on that gun. They found no DNA on a gun. There was initially a testimony about all these knives that were found, and then when Mr. Riggins did a little bit of digging, well, one of them was a butter knife, one of them was rusted and under a seat and looked like it had been there forever. There's only one knife that they were actually interested in. They sent it for testing, and there was nothing on it. And we know that they can test for blood even if something has been wiped clean, because they do that, and in fact they did that in this case. They found no blood on anything that the prosecution is positing could have been a murder weapon. Motive is not an element of premeditated homicide. There's evidence that Mr. Butts and Isaiah had a sexual relationship. And we are, at this point, not contesting the bind over on those counts. That would explain why Mr. Butts would not want to be honest about why he was with Isaiah Harris. That would be enough to make somebody want to lie about their whereabouts or their connection to somebody. There's no evidence that it went any further than that from him. No evidence that he had been confronted by anybody about a sexual assault. No evidence that he was being threatened by Isaiah to expose him or get him in trouble if he didn't do something that she wanted him to do. By the time January 9th rolled around, they weren't really speaking that much. She was, in those text messages that we heard, getting frustrated with him for ignoring her. But never once did she say, well, if you don't talk to me, I'm going to tell everybody what we've been doing. And so there's a complete lack of any motive for him to respond in that way. And I would point the court to a case called People v. Fisher. And it's 193 Mishap 284. It's a 1992 case. And I've got copies. Does the court want?
Yes.
And I point the court to this case because it's a case where homicide was charged and no body was found. A woman named Joyce Fisher was killed, and I believe it was 8 years after her death, her husband was charged. He was convicted, and ultimately the appellate court reversed the conviction because the evidence was insufficient to submit the case to a jury. And so that was the error. And kind of the facts briefly are that Mr. and Mrs. Fisher were in the process of divorcing. It was a pretty contentious relationship. There had been lots of reports that he had been physically abusive to her. And she had even testified that he had threatened to kill her in mid-January of 1978, approximately 3 months before she disappeared. In April of 1978, apparently they were out together, they had lunch, and he was the last person to see her. After that, she disappeared. Now, there was no substantial testimony in that trial regarding her reliability, her long or short-term plans, that she had children, that she was devoted to them, and that she wouldn't have had any reason to run away or leave. And so that gave rise to an inference that she was deceased. The prosecutor in that case offered no evidence of an act that resulted in Joyce Fisher's death. And the court previously has held that the victim's body, while it's not necessary to establish corpus delicti, there has to be something more. There has to be, in this case, either an admission or confession, physical evidence, or some kind of witness testimony. In that case, there was no physical evidence, such as bloodstains or a weapon, linking the defendant to Joyce's death. He did not admit that he killed her, although the prosecutor offered equivocal statements there, that he seemed to say, well, things didn't happen quite that way, and where it made it sound like maybe he did have something or some knowledge. The prosecutor there presented lots of evidence of defendant's motive and opportunity to kill her, but noted that those are not elements of the crime. And inferences, the court says, may not be based on evidence that is uncertain or speculative or merely raises a conjecture or a possibility. And they said in that case, the evidence did not rise above the level of conjecture. And that's what we have here. We have conjecture. We have a lot of pieces of supposed evidence, but we have no connection. They don't connect to each other. They're puzzle pieces. When you put them together, there's no picture. There is no big picture because there is no act that can be testified to that Mr. Butts did, and there's nothing to support that act. There's no evidence that he had a gun and used it. There's no evidence that he had a knife and used it. In fact, the evidence that the prosecutor put forward disputes those theories. The idea that Mr. Butts was in some cover-up, the issue of his phone, I think was pretty well cleared up by Ms. Davis when she testified to the idea that for as long as she's known him, he's never wanted her to look at his phone. And mostly because he's been dealing with who knows how many other women. And that she had tried pretty much everything she could think of to get in that phone well before any of these allegations came about, and that she's never been able to. And so it makes sense that he would not want her to get in that phone, especially if he assumed he was coming home and wanted to have contact with her while he was serving his sentence in the Wayne County Jail, that she not know that she was not the only female he was dealing with. We acknowledge that probable cause is a low standard, but it isn't just limited to whether the prosecution has presented significant or sufficient evidence on each element of the offense, which we submit they have not. They also must determine that there's a reasonable ground of suspicion supported by circumstances sufficiently strong to warrant a cautious person to believe the accused is guilty. That definition of probable cause, or that characterization, comes from People v. Carter, which is 250 Mishap 510. And so you have to have both elements of the crime met, and also those elements have to be met by evidence that is sufficiently strong to believe that it is relevant, that it actually proves what it is saying that it proves. And here we have conjecture, we have speculation, we have supposition, and we have somebody who he did have something to hide. But there's no evidence that he did anything about that. He didn't threaten her, he didn't ask her, or say if anybody finds out that, I will go to jail, or you could go to jail, or you could be hurt. There was nothing like that in any of those conversations that we saw. So, Your Honor, even by the relatively low standard of probable cause, we submit that there is insufficient evidence of both the idea that Mr. Butts did something to cause the death of Messiah Harris, and that he intended to kill her, or that intent to kill was premeditated. We don't know what happened when she left his shop on January the 9th around 9 o'clock. But I think it's safe to say we know she didn't go to his house where Angel Leonard was, or Angel Leonard would probably be here in court and telling us what a weird interaction she had with him, and why it was strange that he wouldn't come inside the house, or why he wouldn't let her out by the car where he was. We don't have any evidence that she went with him to the Park West Motel. We don't have any evidence that they were together beyond 8:30, 9 o'clock on January the 9th. And for that, we're asking the court to deny buying over on count 1, premeditated murder in the first degree.
Rebuttal?
Thank you. First, Judge, I'm going to start with talking about People v. Fisher that Ms. Quick just referenced. And it is important to note that this case is distinguishable for the following reasons. One, we're talking about a different standard. This was a trial issue, a directed verdict standard, where the court is saying at trial beyond a reasonable doubt. First of all and foremost, it's distinguishable for that reason. Secondly, though, the court in Fisher said in this case, there was no physical evidence such as bloodstains or a weapon linking defendant to Joyce's death. In this case, we have bloodstains. We have bloodstains on the hoodie that was found at 7 Mile and Bird, where the defendant spent 2 hours on the night of the 10th going into the 11th. That places them together in the same spot and is very strong evidence that Neziah Harris is in fact dead. Secondly, though, Judge, having dealt with People v. Fisher, Ms. Quick talked about the 9th and 10th, that no one saw the defendant with Neziah for that day going into the 10th and into the 11th. However, we heard from one of his significant others or girlfriends that he was secretive, that he didn't want anyone looking at his phone. And we certainly know that he knows how to keep different women and or girls away from each other. For example, I believe it was Shannon Harris that testified that she was familiar with an address of Outer Drive in Belfort, but she had no idea other than the fact that she would pick the defendant up there at different times. We know through other testimony that the defendant was dating someone that lived there. And with respect to Ms. Quick saying that Neziah never threatened him, never did anything, I'm not sure if this one text message was highlighted by the OIC in this case when she testified, but on November 27th, 2023, at 23 hours and 37 minutes UTC time, Neziah said to the defendant, "When I see you, I'ma fuck you, tell you regret not answering my calls," which I would submit to this court is a threat. And then just over a month later, she says she goes missing at the hands of the defendant. And Ms. Quick also talked about the driving around that Cordell and Jarvis were doing and how it was an unplanned meetup with Neziah on the 9th. However, that may be true from Cordell's perspective, because he wouldn't have known what Jarvis's plan was at that time, but clearly on the 9th, send okay if you've seen the message so I can delete your number, and then the defendant's response, okay. And Jarvis was the one driving per Cordell's testimony. Now, Ms. Quick also talked about the knives and how the knives found in the defendant's car of the one that was tested came back negative, and that's true. We cannot dispute that. However, we know that that was more than a month after, giving the defendant plenty of time to clean it. But beyond that, Judge, this case is one where the defendant thought to, and successfully did, hide the body. And it's a common sense inference that if he thought to hide the body, he would also think to get rid of the murder weapon at the same time. And Judge, Ms. Quick is right. We are talking about a probable cause standard. And as I said, the question is, did the defendant with premeditation probably murder Neziah Harris? And I submit to this court that the answer is yes. And circumstantial evidence, as is noted in the jury instructions at trial court or in circuit court, is just as good as direct evidence. And yes, this is a circumstantial case, but when we put those circumstances together, including the physical evidence, the cell phone evidence, which I would equate with physical evidence for purposes of that, as well as the defendant's opportunity and motive, the picture becomes very clear that the defendant, Jarvis Butts, took the life of Neziah Harris to protect himself from the eventual discovery of his child that he was going to have with her, or at the very least thought he was going to have with her. I ask this court to bind over as charged with the addition or increase of the criminal sexual conduct second degree. Thank you.
As far as Fisher, I agree with the people that this case is distinguishable. This is a case regarding a trial, and
Jarvis Butts.
Okay. This is calling case number, Mr. Butts has 3 cases. Case number 240-596-1901, Houston, Michigan versus Jarvis Butts. Case number 240-596-1801, Houston, Michigan versus Jarvis Butts. And case number 240-596-1701, Houston, Michigan versus Jarvis Butts. Appearances from the people.
Yes. Good afternoon, Your Honor. Tina Ripley on behalf of the people, P83688.
And good afternoon, Your Honor. Matthew Makepeace on behalf of the people, P82796.
Good afternoon. Okay, Ms. Quick.
Good afternoon, I'm a Neighborhood Defender Service by Cheryl Quick, P83973, on behalf of Jarvis Butts. I believe co-counsel is present, Ken Riggins.
Yes, he is.
And good afternoon, Your Honor. Good afternoon to your staff. Neighborhood Defender Services by Ken Riggins, P82125, on behalf of Mr. Jarvis Butts, who stands with me to my right.
Okay, Ms. Quick and Mr. Riggins, do you wait for the reading stand mute?
We do, Your Honor.
Okay, court order not guilty.
Yes, Your Honor.
Court order not guilty plea on behalf of the client with respect to all three cases. Bond recommendation from the people.
Yes, Judge. People are requesting a remand.
On all three?
Yes, Judge.
Can you give just a brief summary for each case?
Yes, Judge.
Very, relatively brief, yes.
Sure, Judge. Starting with the case ending in 619, that is a criminal sexual conduct in the first degree with added charges of criminal sexual conduct in the second degree. That is for Mr. Butts' biological daughter, and she was around 8 or 9 when the touchings first started happening, and 10 when she was penetrated. Mr. Butts is a habitual offender, fourth offense notice, mandatory 25 years, and he also has a prior conviction for criminal sexual conduct in the third degree with a person 13 through 15.
Can you give background on those two cases, please?
Yes, and as it relates to case ending in 618, that is one count of criminal sexual conduct in the second degree. He does have the second offense notice on that, along with the habitual fourth offense mandatory 25. That case is for the sexual assault of a 4-year-old minor, or she was 4 years old at the time, and she was the daughter of one of Mr. Butts' girlfriends at the time, and I would believe her to have contracted chlamydia. And as it relates to the case ending in 617, that case involves the missing 13-year-old Neziah Harris. Neziah went missing on January 9th in 2024 after last being seen alive with Jarvis Butts. Mr. Butts is a serial child rapist and murderer. The evidence will show that Jarvis Butts has been sexually assaulting Neziah Harris since at least the fall of 2022, and that Neziah Harris was pregnant with Jarvis Butts' child on January 9th of 2024, and that Mr. Butts was aware of this pregnancy. Jarvis Butts was supposed to turn himself in on January 9th of 2024 to serve a year-long sentence for CCW. This date ultimately got moved to February 7th of 2024, allowing him the opportunity and time to take care of his Neziah Harris problem. And that's exactly what Mr. Butts did. While Neziah Harris's body has still not been found, the evidence recovered points to only one devastating outcome. Although Jarvis Butts is currently serving a sentence for CCW, that's no excuse for his bond in this case to be anything but a remand. Jarvis Butts has been a convicted child rapist since 2005, as I mentioned, or 2005, I'm sorry. And as I mentioned prior, he is a habitual fourth offender notice with a mandatory 25 years. And if convicted of any of these charges in these cases, that is a mandatory 25. He is an absolute danger to the community and all children. Since getting out of prison, Jarvis Butts has continued to sexually assault children, resulting in now 3 active criminal sexual conduct cases against minors, with no doubt many more out there. The people acknowledge that these charges are allegations at this point, but we're confident in these charges moving forward that the evidence will show that Jarvis Butts not only sexually assaulted and impregnated Neziah Harris, but that he ultimately killed her in order to cover up the ongoing assaults and pregnancy.
Thank you, Ms. Ridley.
Thank you.
From Ms. Quick or Mr. Reagan, any response to the question we made?
Well, I will say, from all conjecture aside, the one thing she said that is true is Mr. Butts is currently under sentence. As such, he is not eligible to be released, so we are not going to object to the bond at this time.
Okay. Ms. Quick, is there anything you want to add?
No, I defer to Mr. Riggins.
Okay. All right. Court never heard an argument as to bond. Remand is provided under MCR 6.106, provided the people show a great presumption of guilt. I think they've more than met their burden. We'll remand Mr. Butts in all 3 cases in custody of Wayne County Jail, other cases pending. Mr. Butts' next court date will be probable cause October 4th, preliminary examination October 10th, 1:45 p.m., at least tentatively scheduled now for the Judge King. Anything else for the record from either any attorney?
Not for the people, Judge. Thank you.
Nothing from the bench, Your
No,
Honor.
Your Honor.
Quick. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Judge.
Butts, you can step aside.
He was denied bond. Prosecutors laid out their case during preliminary hearings. The digital trail, the pregnancy allegation, the communication pattern, the search history, and gradually the narrative became clearer. Then came the courtroom moment that changed everything. Rather than proceed through a full trial, Jarvis Butts pleaded guilty to murder and sexual assault charges connected to Nazia's death. A guilty plea removes uncertainty. It removes the possibility of acquittal. It also prevents some evidence from ever being publicly dissected in open trial. For some families, that brings closure. For others, it leaves questions. Public discussion focused heavily on family connection. Some questioned oversight. Some questioned warning signs. However, legally, the charges centered on Butts. No family members were charged. It is critical to distinguish verified court findings from online speculation. The criminal responsibility in this case was assigned to one individual. Nazia Harris was 13. Her life ended before she had the chance to grow up. The case highlights how grooming can occur within familiar spaces, how digital evidence can reveal patterns, and how proximity can create vulnerability. Jarvis Butts pleaded guilty, but the larger conversation remains. How do families recognize the warning signs? How do systems respond faster? And how do we protect children from those who already have access? Because sometimes the danger isn't a stranger. Sometimes it's someone already inside the circle. This story is a reminder that choices have consequences, not just for those making them, but for every life they touch. If you want updates on this case and others that warrant deeper context, you can join my email list linked below. I only send emails when there's meaningful development. Subscribe to Between Headlines, share your thoughts respectfully in the comments, and thank you for watching.